Okay, let's begin. Welcome back from the midterm. I hope it all went well. Did anybody die of the midterm? I believe I'm right in saying that the midterms will be returned in section this week, which means some of you will have gotten them back. Does that sound right, Jane? Okay, and Lydia's usually pretty on top of things. So if there's any problem with that, let me know. And then later this week, as soon as I get all the scores from the 3 GSIs, I'll come up with some kind of a completely non-binding, but potentially somewhat informative hypothetical grade distribution, and I'll try to get that done no later than Thursday and possibly sooner. A couple of other announcements. Thanksgiving is in 3 weeks. You can make it. That's actually more, that announcement is more for me, in truth. And then 2 weeks after that, now this one really is for me, 2 weeks after that semester will be over. Of course, it won't be over for you because you'll still have exams. But we have 9 more lectures of this class, of which this is the 9th to last. 3 more sections, 1 on probability inference, 1 on social preferences, how we actually take into consideration our desire to help or hurt others, and then or be nice or nasty. And then we'll talk about game theory. So 3 lectures on each of those. There's a problem set up on the website. Currently, it's a bit shorter than some of the others, so but hopefully it will be interesting. Okay. So I'm just going to take a step back, since we're here at the sort of slightly less than two-thirds point of the semester, and talk about what we've done so far and try to fit it into the framework, both the framework of the 3 types of rationality that I've been harping on all along, and also sort of a more general framework of the way economists think about individual choice theory. And then we'll launch into probability inference, which is the topic for today's Bayes rule, which is sort of the standard model for probability inference. And I'll explain exactly what I mean by probability inference and try to give you a sense of why it's economically important. My hope, so in the syllabus, today's lecture was called Bayes rule anomalies. I may not get to any anomalies because I really want to spend a lot of time today getting everybody completely on board with what Bayes rule actually is. This is sort of one of the 2 or 3 things that if you learn nothing else in this class, I want you to actually walk away from here knowing how to use Bayes' rule correctly, because it'll save you a lot of headaches in life and could easily get you a job. Okay. And so, what have we done so far? Let's think about, oh, wait a minute, shoot. There's one more thing I need to talk about, which I should have put in the handout under announcements, which is the policy on the problem set deadline. I am a very big believer in not accepting late work without some kind of penalty. I'm also a big believer in not creating an incentive for people to be super late to class. So that's why I have this somewhat hard-line policy of picking up the problem sets at exactly 10 minutes after 11, and then after that they're late. However, what was brought to my attention is that there are people who can't get here by 11:10 because they have a class too far away before this, and I don't think it's reasonable. I don't think it's the university's expectation that you should have to leave one class early in order to participate in another class. So what I want to do is this, and I will send out an email explaining this in detail. What I want to do from now on is this. If you have a class right before this, and as a result can't make it here in time to turn in your problem set, send me an email with with your schedule from Fairfax attached to it, so that I can actually see that that is the case. And for everyone who is going to do that, I'll give you an extra 10 minutes at the beginning of the period to turn in your problem set. Okay, so I'll send out an email detailing that before long. And if you feel like if you have suffered up to now in the absence of that policy, just let me know. Okay, so what are we doing? This is a framework that I haven't talked about yet, but I want to sort of put things into this framework. Economists, whether sort of taking the standard approach or non-standard behavioral approach, for the most part, we think of the economic theory of individual choice. I'm not thinking about firms here, but we think about the economic theory of individual choice as basically consisting of 2 big pieces: preferences and beliefs. Now, if you took 100A or something like it, you are probably familiar with individual choice theory consisting of preferences and what else? What's the other big component that you learn right up front in lecture 3 of 100A? Constraints. Okay. So, for example, under conditions where there's no intertemporal trade-off and no uncertainty, you get a situation where, say, you have 2 goods. You don't have to write this down if you don't want to, but you can. You get a situation where you have some budget constraint based on prices and your income, and then some map of indifference curves that represents your preferences. Then, as we sort of embellish the model or extend the model into situations where there's uncertainty, situations where there's multiple time periods, you don't know what the future is going to hold, the constraint becomes increasingly complicated. Okay? Now, ultimately, what this constraint defines, it is helpful to think of it as a constraint. I find it more generalizable and helpful to think of that as your choice set. Okay? And the choice set includes all the points under the constraint, but we know that if you assume monotonicity and preferences, you will choose something on the constraint. But that triangle, nonetheless, is your choice set. These are the available options. Okay? And your choice set, in practice, if you want, and I don't mean in the real world, I mean within theory, in practice, your choice set is determined by sort of things outside of yourself, prices and income and the likelihood that certain states of the world will unfold, etc. Okay? But what you perceive your choice set to be is determined by your beliefs. Suppose, for example, you don't know exactly what the price of these goods are. Maybe they go up and down all the time, and you don't know what the price is today, but you know a distribution of prices over time. Okay? Then you might have some prediction about what the price is likely to be today. Okay? And then your choice set is determined by your beliefs about that set of probabilities. Or, to make things more interesting, suppose that the outcome depends on something more complicated than just the distribution of prices that you happen to know. Like, we'll look at a couple of examples where your choice set is, sort of whether or not to get a test or whether or not to act on the results of a medical test. Okay? And the outcome of your action, right, this test says I'm HIV positive. Should I take action on that? And the choice set might be, the actions you could take might be something like start taking antiretroviral drugs or don't start taking antiretroviral drugs. Now, some of you may or may not know that antiretroviral drugs, while lifesavers, also have some fairly problematic side effects for many people. So this is a non-trivial choice. Okay? So your action set, the set of things you could choose is start taking the antiretroviral drugs or not. But what you really want to choose between is not actions, but outcomes. What will be the outcome for me if I start taking antiretroviral drugs? What will be the outcome for me if I don't? And the outcomes depend upon the probability that the test is correct. If the test is correct and you don't take antiretrovirals, you're in for a heap of worry, right? Because HIV untreated is not nice. Okay? But if the test is wrong, as a false positive, then your actions are your choice in some set. You could claim that your choice set is the same, take the drugs, don't take the drugs. But we don't think of people having preferences over their actions. We think of people having preferences over outcomes, right? And if you don't know whether the test is right or wrong, you don't know exactly what will be the outcome of your actions. And so again, your beliefs about the outcomes of your actions are what really determine the choice set that you're choosing from. And it gets much more complicated than this. If you're engaged in a strategic interaction with another player in something that we might model using game theory, right, you don't know exactly what type of person they are. They might be a high ability type or low ability type. They might be a friendly type or not friendly type, right? They might be hungry or satiated. And you don't know exactly what their response is going to be to your action. And so if your outcome depends upon their response, you don't know exactly what the outcome of your choices will be. And not only that, but if you're in a repeated game that involves lots of complicated strategic computation to figure out what people are most likely to do, right, like a chess game, what will I do? What will you do in response to my actions? If I'm responding to your actions in response to my actions, blah, 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 right? This is why I don't play chess, because it just makes my brain hurt. But lots of situations in life are like that, okay? So all of that goes into your beliefs about the outcomes of your choices, and then you have preferences over those outcomes. Okay. Now, here's the framework that we've been sort of harping on. And I'm going to modify it a little bit because I don't like the terminology that I've been using. So I've said to you over and over again, standard economics makes 3 kinds of rationality assumptions. I think that this is a comprehensive list. I'm not happy with the name I've been using for the third one. Okay, so we make the assumption of rational preferences, right? So that obviously links up to preferences. And this is a huge field of there's a huge variety in what kinds of assumptions we can make about people's preferences with respect to risk. Are they risk averse, risk seeking, with respect to time, are they patient or impatient, et cetera, et cetera. And then I've talked a lot about rational expectations, which directly speaks to people's beliefs. Do people correctly predict future probabilities? Do they correctly predict how they themselves will respond to the situations that they face? Do they predict how their preferences will change? And all of that speaks to beliefs. What do people believe will be true, and how does that determine what they believe to be the outcomes of their actions? Okay. Then there's this other thing. Now, there's this thing I've been calling rational self-interest, and I thought that was very clever when I came up with it, but I don't think it's the right thing at all. The term, and the reason I came up with that other term, because I wanted it to match, I wanted to have the rational first. The term that is actually used in the literature and has been since 1955 is unbounded rationality. Okay? So typically, what we mean when we talk about unbounded rationality is that there are situations in which, to figure out the probabilities of certain things happening, to figure out strategically what a rational opponent in a game will actually do in response to your behavior, to figure out, say, for example, what will be the tax consequences of my investment decisions, actually involves complicated math. It involves some computational sophistication and some computational ability. Okay? And it's like the story I told you about why it's obviously rational utility maximizing to get an 800 on the GRE math test. Why don't people do it? They must be irrational. And they are irrational in the sense of being boundedly irrational or sort of cognitively bounded. There are ways in which our model, in order to get you to quote-unquote correct or rational beliefs about outcomes, our models will often require that you do, you being the agent in the model, crazy amounts of math. Or maybe not even crazy, but just, personally, my hypothesis about the amount of math that the average consumer does in the average really important life consequential decision is that they will do addition, but they won't do multiplication. Or if they'll do multiplication, they won't do division. And I hope one day to test that. I think that you can, anyway, but I won't go into that. But our models place vastly greater demands on people computationally than that. Okay? So the reason I've been calling that rational self-interest is that if you're in a game situation, or if you're in a situation that involves inferring the probability. I was hiking in the Dolomites in northern Italy a few years ago, and I was staying alone in the winter room of a lodge that was closed for the season. And it started to rain, and I needed to sort of go out from the lodge and take care of things. And I heard a noise from the woods. And it was a noise unlike any I'd ever heard before. And it was terrifying, and I had no idea what it was. And before I left the dryness of the porch to go out into the rainy wet and take care of my business, I had to make an inference as to what that noise was. Right? What was the probability that it was just, I don't know, some hedgehog that happened to have a very loud voice? What was the probability that it was a wild boar? It turns out it was a wild boar, okay? And I made the correct inference and stayed on the porch. So this is what I mean by rational self-interest, is that if you see people leaving the porch, going out into the rain and getting gored by wild boars over and over and over again, you might assume that they're not rationally self-interested, that they're not doing the right math to figure out how to take care of themselves, or to figure out how to maximize their preferences. So it's not that their preferences are irrational, it's that they can't computationally figure out how to maximize their preferences. That's why I was using the term rational self-interest. But I think it's probably best to fall back on the more usual term of unbounded rationality. Okay. All right, so we've seen plenty of non-standard preferences so far, sometimes leading to irrational preferences, actual preference reversals, failures of transitivity. Right? So for example, when we had non-standard preferences by sticking a reference point into your instantaneous utility function, we didn't immediately wind up with irrational preferences. We didn't immediately wind up with indifference curves crossing. That only happened when we allowed the reference point to change. Right? So initially we just got a nice nested stack of kinked indifference curves, but then when we allowed the reference point to change, we found that we could get indifference curves crossing, and then that becomes a failure of the rationality assumption. And the same thing with beta-delta preferences. Sticking a beta in there and having this time inconsistent discounting factor is a non-standard preference. It doesn't automatically lead to preference reversals, but it can, and it often does. Okay? So we've seen plenty of that, and we will see plenty more. And we've seen non-standard beliefs, right? So we've seen people failing to predict their state-dependent preference changes. We've seen people failing to predict their future impatience, naives. We've seen projection bias. And those kinds of non-standard beliefs usually lead directly to a failure of rational expectations, usually. Right? If you don't foresee some change or some probability unfolding, you almost by definition, you can't have rational expectations. What we're going to start looking at, we'll see more of both of these things, but what we're going to start looking at is non-standard assumptions about bounded rationality. Okay? We're going to start questioning the assumption that people can do an unlimited amount of math to satisfy our models. And this is where, this is one of the places where people get most irritated with economists, and I think rightly so. Okay, so let's talk about probability inference and decision making. It turns out, figuring out the probabilities of things can be relatively easy. If it's, what's the probability that, I don't know, the Seattle Mariners will win the World Series next year, and what's the probability that I'll be wearing a red shirt on that day? Well, then you just take the probability that the Seattle Mariners will win the World Series next year, and the probability that I'll be wearing a red shirt. As long as those things are independent, you multiply them together. It's not that hard, right? But it's the reverse. If I wear a red shirt next October, what is the probability based on that information that the Seattle Mariners have won the Super Bowl, okay, or the World Series? The Mariners are a baseball team, aren't they? I never learned to speak that language. Most economic decisions, despite that, what I call the L bracket of 100A, are made under some degree of uncertainty. And what do we do? What uncertainty do we face? We face uncertainty about what conditions we are currently facing. I don't know whether my opponent is good at this game or bad. I don't know. I'm about to invest in a company. I don't know, in fact, whether there's corruption in the company or it's being managed well. And we don't know for sure what will happen in the future. Right? I don't know if a meteor will hit headquarters of this firm. I don't know if my opponent will retaliate if I'm a jerk, that kind of thing. Now, both of these things we don't know in the present, things we don't know in the future, affect the outcome of the actions that we choose. Right? So they both affect our choice set, or what we perceive to be our choice set. To understand decision-making under uncertainty, we've got to cover a lot of bases, and we've covered a couple of them already. So the first thing is we've got to understand how the instantaneous utility function affects people's risk preferences. So we looked at sticking reference dependence in the instantaneous utility function and seeing what happened to people's risk preferences without changing anything else in the model, right? And we got weird things like the break-even effect and the house money effect and stuff like that, and we came up with an explanation for the equity premium puzzle, and that was all very interesting. And that was all just based on the shape of the instantaneous utility function, nothing to do with computations whatsoever. Then we looked a little bit at how people weight the probabilities of different states of the world. So maybe you know that the chance of winning the lottery is 0.0000012, but you just like that more than you weight that probability more heavily than a linear weighting scheme would suggest, and then you buy lottery tickets when perhaps arguably you shouldn't or something like that. But then there's the third piece, which is kind of a little bit, in some sense, it's a little bit more straightforward, and it's sort of one of the more ridiculous assumptions of expected utility theory, is that people know what the bloody probabilities are in the first place, right? So there's this idea that there are objective probabilities out there that you could know. And you might not know exactly what the probability of the sky falling is, but you have a range, right? You know, it's in some range, and you have some idea of the distribution of likely probabilities that the sky is going to fall. But in fact, you'll find that frequently when we apply this model to specific situations, the computations necessary to figure out what the probabilities are outrageous, right? At least for someone like me. So that's what we're going to talk about. Ooh, this is not the topic for the next 2 lectures. It's the topic for the next 3 lectures. Okay, so the general framework we're going to use, as always in the version of psychology and economics that I teach, we're just going to heist the standard model and poke at it a little bit. Right? We're not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We're going to keep as much of it as we can. Yes, Pals? So Pals' question is, didn't we in the first lecture when I talked about Milton Friedman, didn't we sort of say, or at least we certainly heard, and I think I approvingly commented on Milton Friedman's statement, that it doesn't matter if the billiard player actually knows the probabilities of certain shots working out, only that he or she acts as if they know. That's right. That's right. So when I've shown you the correct and mathematically burdensome way to infer probabilities from limited information, we could then say, well, it doesn't matter if people actually know how to do that math, right? And by the end of this section, you all will know how to do that math, but right now there's bunches of you who don't. It's quite right to say that it doesn't matter whether people actually could answer mathematical questions of this type on an exam, only that they act as if they could. And what I'm going to demonstrate to you is that they manifestly don't act as if they could. And even in situations where it would be very obviously the right thing to do to sit down and compute the probabilities, right? Like you're a doctor trying to decide whether or not to act on an HIV test, you should have been trained on how to figure out the trade-off between type 1 and type 2 error when you were in graduate school, and we don't. So it's going to turn out it doesn't really matter whether we think the problem is that people can't do math or whether it's that they just act like they can't do math. It comes to the same thing. Yeah, I mean, if you're choosing what mutual fund to invest in, you really should actually do some math. Okay. So the general framework that we're going to use, which is, we have probability theory to fall back on here, and this is just manifestly correct, is that we're going to assume that people infer probabilities from a combination of past experience and new information. And I say correct. This is the correct way to do it if you want to get the right answer. There is a known. We don't have to make huge heroic assumptions to figure out what people should do. This is given to us by probability theory. Okay, so a basketball coach deciding whether to leave a tired player in the game may seem trivial. I'm putting it in there because I'm going to show you some research that's relevant to this. Okay, so the coach has past information about this player and how they perform when they're tired, plus new information. Maybe they have a new signal about the player this time around. Okay, the security officer deciding who to search. This is problem set H. Okay, some transportation security administration officer at an airport who has some knowledge, they think, perhaps it's correct, perhaps it's not, about the probability of various different types of people being terrorists, and then they also have specific information about each individual person that walks through the line. Okay, so background information, new information. Doctor deciding whether to diagnose a patient with HIV has some information about the patient's history, knows what kind of risk behaviors they engage in, et cetera, plus they have this new information, which is this test. Or test results. An investor deciding which mutual fund to put their money in may have more or less information about the return of various different funds over time, and then also get some signal about a set of specific mutual fund managers, which is what were their returns in the last quarter or the last 2 quarters. Okay, so let's think about what people get right and what they get wrong. And I'm just going to give you a sort of insultingly dumb example, which is you have to decide whether to see the new Spielberg movie. Now, I don't know if there was actually a new Spielberg movie last year. I think there isn't a new Spielberg movie this year, which is a mercy in some sense, because Spielberg movies for me are always a disappointment because the man has such talent and almost always squanders it. But here's the idea: I've seen numerous Spielberg movies in the past. Some of you may be young enough to have been spared some of his more disappointing attempts. But you've seen numerous Spielberg movies in the past, which means you've seen 1.5 good ones, right? You've seen Schindler's List and you've seen the first part of Saving Private Ryan. You've also heard reviews about this specific movie from critics, from your friends. So you have past experience with the general category of things that you're evaluating, and you have new information about the specific thing that you're evaluating. Okay? So here's the intuitively obvious and basically correct approach to inferring the probability that you will like this new Spielberg